Ever wondered why you get booked for this? Well, from games being so boring that people stopped watching to Lionel Messi being able to play for Argentina, these are players who changed the rules of football forever. Starting with Messi's Argentine teammate Emi Martinez. Anyone who watched the 2022 Qatar World Cup can tell you that the goalkeeper was the best in the world when it came to living in the heads of the opposition rent-free. So much so that it helped them lift the trophy in the end. However, after the final, the rules would never be the same. You see, Martinez repeatedly argued with the referee, trolled the penalty takers to throw them off, celebrated saves in a non-sportsmanlike way, and even threw the ball away before Tchouaméni's penalty, which he went on to miss. Now, Martinez owned this. He knew what he was doing, as seen during the trophy ceremony where he went on to thrust the Golden Glove award towards the fans in the stadium. However, following the tournament, a new rule was introduced. It was dubbed the anti-Emi Martinez rule. This meant that goalkeepers could no longer move off their line, touch the goalposts, or talk to the penalty taker and get in their head. Basically, save the penalty and get on with your life. Now, Martinez laughed about the rule, but ultimately revealed that all that mattered was winning Messi his first World Cup, and that going forward, he and others will just adapt to whatever other rules are added. Now, from one World Cup to another, as we head to 2010 in South Africa with England versus Germany. The game ended 4-1, with England being knocked out of the tournament in the round of 16. That should have been the end of the conversation, but instead the talking points continued surrounding one of the most iconic goals ever scored in the competition's history. However, it didn't count. Of course, I am talking about that Frank Lampard goal. If there was any player in the world at the time that you wanted a football to fall to at the edge of the box, it was probably Frank Lampard. Even a keeper the caliber of Manuel Neuer was left with no choice but to watch as the ball thumped off the crossbar into the gaping goal behind him. Unfortunately for England though, there were two men who didn't watch. Referee Jorge Larionda was distracted by a tackle just in front of him seconds before the goal, whilst assistant referee Mauricio Espinosa was busy tracking the German defensive line for potential offsides. Thus, they missed the all-important goal that would have put England level at 2-2 and potentially changed the shape of the game. Massive copium there from me, I know. Nonetheless, England was sent home, yet the impact this goal had on football would go beyond this one game, as thanks to it, goal line technology was introduced. This saw referees fitted with a watch that would notify them when a ball has completely crossed the goal line to snuff out any doubt or human error, despite UEFA President Michel Platini being against it. By 2012, goal line technology was first tested during the Club World Cup and later used in the Premier League during the 13-14 season, before then being introduced into the World Cup during 2014. This is by far the best technology-based rule introduced to the sport, where I think everyone can agree that it is great. Even Lampard admitted that it's a positive for the game as a whole, unlike VAR. Now, sticking to the topic of international football, this next rule made it so that Messi could actually play for Argentina, believe it or not. Let me explain. You see, currently in the MLS, they do not take a break during FIFA's scheduled international games like the other top leagues do. Now, whilst this may sound great because you don't have to watch Gareth Southgate play 7 defenders against a team ranked 75th in the world rankings playing the most mind-numbingly boring football you've ever seen, boring! It's not so great for those going to Inter Miami to watch their newest superstar Lionel Messi, because he won't be there. That's right, the international break really forces MLS squads to dig behind the sofa to put together a starting 11, because most of the superstars they have jetted off to meet with their international teammates. Things could soon change, however, now that Messi has entered the chat. Inter Miami coach Gerardo Martino has revealed how the league is thinking about introducing a break, saying that it is probable that it will happen, meaning that Messi would be able to play for both club and country without having to prioritise one or the other, as without him, Inter Miami's hopes of winning the US Open Cup were over. Now, moving on, I'm sure as a kid, you've all just thought, why not kick the crap out of the ball while it's in the goalkeeper's hands and score, right? Well, the answer, believe it or not, is death. This is the story of the talented Jimmy Thorpe and how he was unfortunate enough to be the result of one of football's darkest days. The former Sunderland keeper played 139 games for the club after signing at just 17 years old, becoming a first-team regular by 19. But on February 1st, 1936, his career was cut short. After claiming the ball in his box, he was repeatedly kicked by opposition Chelsea players as they tried to get the ball out of his hands. In doing so, he was kicked in both the chest and head. He saw out the rest of the match, however later collapsed at home. 4 days later, he lost his life in hospital due to health issues made worse by the kicking. This tragic end to Thorpe's career led to a change in the rules, where players were no longer allowed to raise their foot to a goalkeeper when they had control of the ball in their arms. So next time you all complain about how goalkeepers are supposedly overprotected, let's remember that it could just well be saving their life. Whilst I'm on the topic of this too, it's worth mentioning Karius and how him costing Liverpool the Champions League in 2018 against Real Madrid also contributed towards a new rule prioritising player safety. It was revealed after the game that during it he suffered a concussion, which likely explains the horrific errors he made. Because of this, a concussion sub was introduced where if a player is suspected to have gotten one during a game, they can be safely substituted off without risk. Now, quickly coming back to Jimmy Thorpe, the thing that led to him picking up the ball in the first place was actually a back pass. Yes, that's right, back then simply passing the ball back to your keeper to pick up was perfectly fine and legal to do. In fact, it wasn't until 1992 that the backpass rule as we know it was even introduced. During the Euros that year, Denmark went the whole way and won it. A fantastic story, right? Well, they have a lot to thank time wasting for, if we're being honest. One of their most effective tactics was to simply pass the ball back to goalkeeper Peter Schmeichel, who would then just wait for an opponent to press him, pick the ball up and carry on. It was really bad. Like, Denmark would literally have a free kick on the halfway line, and rather than playing it long into the box to try and get a shot off or at least win the second ball, they would instead just boot it back to the goalkeeper, who'd wait and wait just to pick it up and start again. So if you think football is boring now and you like to reminisce about ye good old days, just remember there was a time where goalkeeper and defender could just play 1-2s with each other and pick it up. Now, Denmark and Schmeichel weren't the ones to create this tactic, they were just the final nail in the coffin. The issues began during the 1990 World Cup, which saw an average of 2.2 goals per game, which was the lowest ever seen at a World Cup. This tactic was so boring that a rule was finally introduced almost immediately after the Euros to stop it happening again the following season, which just so happened to be the first ever Premier League. And now, some 30 years later, it has seen the birth of the ever so important ball-playing goalkeepers good with their feet. Now, whilst you may feel like this rule saved football from being mind-numbingly boring, just you wait till you hear about the last rule in this video, alright? I may never complain about the offside rule ever again. One thing I have to complain about though is that despite the insane support lately, 99.8% of you are not subscribed. So do me a favour, would you? Ding that notification bell. Alright, but first, I bet you've asked yourself the question of why can't players take their top off at some point in your life, right? Exactly, we all have. Well, we have the legendary Uruguayan Diego Forlan to thank for it. Whilst his time at Man United didn't quite live up to the hype, he scored a banger against Southampton, which went on to be the winner. In all the excitement, the striker took off his top and ran to the corner flag towards his friends and family, swinging his shirt in the air. No harm done, so what was all the fuss about? What was so bad that FIFA deemed it was necessary to change the rules almost immediately to book a player for such a celebration? Well, as the game kicked off again, a little Forlan could be seen running around the pitch, putting tackles in, topless. The forward just couldn't get his top back on and even required assistance from the coaching staff to do so. He did the Balotelli before Balotelli. Now, had Forlan done this a few years earlier, 1966 to be exact, he wouldn't have got a yellow card. Not because the no shirt rule didn't exist, but because yellow cards didn't. In fact, red cards didn't either. Instead, referees would verbally tell players off with a warning instead of a yellow and verbally send them off instead of a red. The problem with this is that not everyone speaks the same language. Most notably seen during the 1966 World Cup in a game between England and Argentina. The ref for this match was German and didn't speak any other languages, which posed a bit of an issue when he verbally sent off Argentine Antonio Ratin. The problem was that Ratin didn't understand what he was saying, and so for 10 minutes he didn't leave the pitch. They had to call a member of the referee committee who luckily happened to be at the game to send the player off and clear things up. Thus, things clearly had to change, because when nobody between the ref, the players and the fans can understand each other, there's a bit of an issue. And so a universal language for a warning and sending off needed to come into play. The funny part of it, however, is how. Ken Aston, the member of the committee, was stuck in traffic staring at traffic lights endlessly, which is when the penny dropped. In every country, traffic lights are the same: red, amber, green. Simple. They were universally understood, and that's exactly what football needed. And so the yellow card and red card system was introduced so that everyone on the pitch and everyone in the crowd could immediately understand what the decision was once introduced in the 1970 World Cup. Now, the rule has mostly stayed the same since then. However, we're entering a future where a 10-minute sin bin seen in other sports is becoming a more and more likely reality at the top level after being tested in lower leagues. And seeing how the threshold for getting a yellow card is getting lower and lower, with players being booked for the smallest things, a sin bin probably would be a good middle ground. Now, this last rule was the one that I was talking about that really did save the sport from dying. During the early 1900s was a player called Bill McCracken, and he created the offside trap. Now, of course, nowadays the rules of the offside state that 2 defenders need to be between the goal and the attacking player when the ball is played. However, back then it was 3. This made catching opponents offside much easier, with an average of 30 to 40 per game. McCracken became the GOAT at playing the offside trap, so much so that Italian coach Vittorio Pozzo, the only coach to lead a national team to 2 World Cup titles, as well as the only coach to win the World Cup and Olympics, even wrote a book on McCracken and his offside tactic according to him. However, people were worried about the future of the sport, as it became so stop-start with so few goals in a game that people started getting really fed up. With the introduction of the 2-player offside rule, however, games saw an immediate 42.3% increase in goals per match, which may well have saved football altogether. Ironically, McCracken retired before the new offside rule was introduced the following year in 1925, however, his legacy forever lives on. So whilst we can all agree that, especially with the introduction of VAR, that the offside rule isn't perfect, it's certainly better than what it was back then. Now, the offside rule is currently in the process of being updated once more. Tests are being conducted regarding a rule proposed by Arsene Wenger, where a player will only be deemed offside if their entire body is ahead of the defender, which would more than likely see another 40 or so % increase in goals per match, as it would be very lenient on the attackers. Which rule change do you think was the best for football? Let me know in the comments below, but in the meantime, check out this video on your screen right now.